humanity. My name is Am Rosen. Welcome to the podcast library, Psychological Keys to Human Fulfillment. You've entered the section in this library titled The Art of Intimacy, Freedom and Intimacy. This is podcast 3, Introduction to the Battle of the Sexes, concluded. We're going to begin where we left off at the conclusion of podcast 2. I suggest that if you haven't already done so, that you first view podcast 2 before viewing this new episode. You can find it on my website at www.lifegame, that's Lifegame, like the game of life, www.lifegame.com. To pick up from where we left off at the end of podcast 2, our two prehistoric primitive prototypes, the male and the female, have taken up residence in the Garden of Eden, now respectively as Adam and Eve, and they're still living in a state of innocence in relation to nature. But some sort of an evolutionary neurological leap, a gestalt transformation of consciousness has begun taking place. Adam's gotten quite nutty with this change lately. He's suddenly running all about, roaming all over creation, naming everything. That's a garden. That's a tree. That's a woman. That's a snake. That's a forbidden fruit. That's a problem. What is this naming process? It's the innocent beginning of the loss of innocence. It signifies the rudimentary emergence of our species into the beginning of consciously processing from a more intellectually centered perspective. And the intellectual level operates through far different forms and functions than does the feeling level. No longer is Adam content to be hungry, pick and eat a piece of fruit, and then forget about it till the next time he's hungry. Now he starts to think about it. This feels like this. And that feels like that. Of course, he doesn't understand any of this. He's just enchanted with his seeming ability to become the center of a self-implied order of things. Up to this point, it's still all just half-absent mental reflex. He doesn't even realize that that's what he's doing. So, Eve comes sauntering through the garden. She comes upon Adam and she starts to get him all hot and bothered because Eve, the female, is the natural sexual aggressor. Usually we've tried to play it from the other way around. So why is it that the female and not the male is the natural sexual aggressor? Unless a male is so singularly tuned into the reproductive process, then even then it's rather doubtful that his only motivation for participation in sex is, "Come here, baby. Now open your thighs. I'm going to ejaculate a little sperm in there and make a baby. Then I'll come back in a few years and do it again." Unless that's sort of reproductive orthodoxy is his only reason, then just about every reason he has for participation in sex is a kind of a personal ego trip. Now, that's not good nor bad. It's not right nor wrong. It just indicates his need to try to justify his self-image. It's because I'm so handsome. I'm so smart. I'm so strong. I'm so rich. I'm so powerful. I'm so horny. I'm so needy. I want it. I need it. I deserve it. I, me. I, me. He's got the screaming memes. Now, obviously, a woman can be just as egotistical as can a man, but she does have one aspect to her psyche that he doesn't have. She is the initiating agent. Only the woman can give the passage from birth into life. It is her responsibility, and it comes with corresponding psychic emotional privileges. There's an expression that sometimes refers to a woman as sexually being in heat. The basis for such a state is the reproductive drive. Often, through conditioned inhibitions or intellectually distorted overlay, women lose access to this more primal state of libidinal thrust. On an emotional, reflex level, women are as much a victim of this state as are the men who come under the spell of their almost undeniable sexual magnetism. When in such a state, when the woman makes contact, connects with the male object of her reproductively galvanized sexual drive, well, she'll have that man naked and ejaculating inside of her before he even realizes what's going on. However, this mechanism of sexual magnetism can also be consciously accessed and directed by the woman without her having to focus in upon the reproductive drive. When a woman becomes capable of consciously accessing and directing this erotic sensibility, whether she makes love with one man, 100 men, or no man at all, she can approach the ecstasy of the sexual experience without having to try to justify it through the vanity of her self-image. If she does so while making the man part of her pleasure, if she initiates this sexual exchange between them from this level, then the man in turn becomes free to explore the fullness of his sexuality without first having to sell himself a bill of goods. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that. But this is the basis of why, from the male-female orientation, the female is the natural sexual aggressor. Okay. So Eve gets Adam turned on, and they start making love. Now, this isn't the first time they've had sexual intercourse, but let's say this is the first time they've had sex since this new level of intellectual self-consciousness has been activated. Anyway, they're making love, and it's never felt this good before. Adam's thinking to himself, "This is incredible. Oh my goodness, this is the best it's ever been." Wait a moment. Is this the best it's ever been? Well, why is it so much better this time? Hey, could it be any better still? Adam's thinking, or rather, he is labeling feelings in his mind for comparison. He's no longer content to get the sensation, feel the urge, have an erection, and then ejaculate to relieve it until the next time it happens again. Now he's thinking about how it was and how he can manipulate it in the future. Again, he doesn't understand any of this. He doesn't even realize that's what he's doing. But somehow, from this intellectual level of contemplation, he's able to elongate and intensify his feelings like he's never done before. Subsequently, his body is starting to experience pleasure at an intensity that he's never known before. So, they're making love. There are sensations and feelings escalating between thoughts. And they build and build until they explode together in a crescendo of orgasms. Then they melt into little disoriented puddles. But when they regain their senses, Adam gets up and he turns on Eve and he says, "You slut, you whore, you bitch, I'm screwed up, and it's all your fault." Whoa! Why is he turning on this beautiful woman who's given him all this pleasure and laying this negativity on her? Well, a few 100,000 years ago, the male usurped power from the female. Why? Because he was frightened. Now, I'm not into fear, but if you're going to be frightened, he was into the big fears, like, please don't rip me apart with your claws and devour me with your teeth. What happens if I can't find food? If I get sick? If I can't take care of myself? What happens if I get too weak to keep up with the others? What happens if I die? What happens after I die? All the great problems of life and mysteries of death. How did Adam handle his fears of the unknown? He suppressed them, and he avoided contact with any feelings that might weaken him by making him susceptible to the threat of danger those feelings implied. He ripped off power from the female, pumped up his macho, beat up the other animals, and became, so to speak, the toughest ass kicker in the valley. And he's been doing fine like that for a few 100,000 years. But now he's starting to become self-conscious. Every time he acts, he also winds up thinking about his actions. This is messing up his game plan. He can, and too often will, continue to line her up against the wall and sexually use her. But this alone no longer seems to provide the release that he needs. He can no longer get his fix of tenderness unless he allows her to interact from the same intellectual level of consciousness that he's begun processing from. For some unknown reason, he feels threatened to do this. Irrationally, he feels afraid to let her get that close to him for fear that he'll lose his advantaged edge of power back to her. Then he'll have to face those original fears which he's repressed, which have become like the archetypal boogeyman in the recesses of his mind. Eve, on the other hand, well, the female may not have figured out all the great incomprehensible mysteries of life, death, and beyond, but she didn't quite suppress her feelings about them in the same way either. So, now we add some dialogue to our pantomime. That's not what's really bothering her. It's more like, look, you son of a... It was bad enough a few 100,000 years ago you ripped off power from me. That was bad enough. But now, here I am. I give you all this pleasure. Don't lie to me. I was there. You enjoyed every moment of it. And what do? You turn on me after and lay all this negativity on me. Well, that tears it. You're an untrustworthy bastard, and I'm going to find a way to get even with you. So now we have the female in mistrust and disgust breaking away to make retaliatory war upon the male. So, what's Adam going to do? He's got to get his fix of tenderness, or he could go insane. Unfortunately, he comes too close to doing that, even today. It would be nice if he could say, Eve, I feel kind of anxious and confused inside. You seem calm about all this. Maybe I could run what's bothering me past you, and you could help me sort it out. It would be nice, but you can't help someone who doesn't admit that they have a need to be helped. And he's afraid to get that close to her for fear that he'll lose the power he's stolen to keep at bay the fears that he doesn't want to admit that he has. So, what's Adam going to do? Well, a few 100,000 years ago, after the male stole power from the female, he used it to energize his focus. He reached into his little developing intellect and came up with his first bunch of tools. He came up with clubs and spears and knives and pits and traps, and he went out and beat up all the other animals. Thereby, he ordained himself king of the ass kickers. He's become so enchanted with the success that his intellect seems to provide that to handle this new problem, he again turns to his intellect and says to himself, let me think about it. Again, he reaches inside his developing intellect and comes up with a new set of tools. This time he comes up with contracts, promises, enrollments, commitments. He says to her, well, it's true. You can walk to the water now and the wild beasts won't attack you. But I just realized something. I just had this divine revelation. And what it's caused me to realize is what I have dominion over. I own the water rights. I own the right of way to the path you're walking on. I own the urn you're carrying. I own the sandals on your feet. In fact, I've now divinely come to realize that I own you. And you can't get around in our society anymore unless you have some of this barter stuff. We'll call it money. And you can't have any of your own. You can only have what some man is willing to allow you to have. Unfortunately, up until very recently, and still in many parts of the world today, this is how women have been relegated. What the male did was to economically power grid society. If he had to allow her to open up more of her intellect so that he could get the quality of release that he needed from his sexual fix, then he arranged it so that she couldn't get around to do much with such access. He built, so to speak, little bird cages. He calls them love nests. In the back of these connubial bird cages, he has little locked rooms. He calls them bedrooms. And the rationale becomes, well, you're the expectant mother of my children. Therefore, 95% of the time, I expect you to act the way my own mother was forced to act. But 5% of the time, I want you behind this locked bedroom door, being that raging slut, whore, bitch, temptress, Eve, so that I can get my rocks off, clear my head, and go out and deal with the boys. Now, who is he asking her to be a hot, loving woman for? For a strong, open-minded man who wants to meet and work it out? No. Usually it's for a pent-up, neurotic, overgrown boy who won't cop to his own fears of inadequacy. The women who play this game traditionally become known as wives, and they find their own rather interesting ways to retaliate. The women who don't play this game, either because they can't find someone to play with, or because they don't want to be that structured and controlled by a man's point of view, become known as sluts and whores, because they need to have something to trade to get the money they need to get around with. So, now you have this four-way cross. You have men making war upon men, men usurping power from women, thereby making war on them. You have women breaking away in mistrust and disgust to make their own kind of retaliatory war upon men. And you have the women, the wives and the sluts, socially slugging it out with each other. And these resultant emotional patterns have continued pretty much this way up into the present day. In the next podcast, we'll start to consider how this leftover stranglehold of Stone Age emotions is still obscuring the modernized fulfillment of greater intimacy in our globalizing world of space-age technology. Thank you for lending your consideration. Until we meet again.